Aaliyah's heart raced as she and her twin sister Amara stepped forward in the boarding line, clutching their boarding passes tightly. Their trip had been carefully planned for weeks, bags packed with excitement, and dreams soaring higher than the plane they were about to board. But in a split second, everything they anticipated shattered when a sharp voice sliced through the hum of the crowded terminal. "Aaliyah, step aside." The words weren't loud, but they carried weight. They cut through the sound of rolling luggage and boarding announcements. Every syllable landed heavy with command, with dismissal. Aaliyah froze mid-step, blinking in confusion. She turned toward the airline agent who had spoken, a woman in a stiff uniform with a pinched expression. "I'm sorry," Aaliyah asked, her voice trembling but steady enough to demand clarity. "You heard me," the agent said, her tone colder now. "Step aside. You and your sister." Passengers behind them shifted, sighing in annoyance, dragging their bags impatiently. The line stalled, and all eyes began to fall on the twins. Aaliyah's cheeks burned under the sudden spotlight. Amara looked at her, wide-eyed, silently asking, "Why us?" "We already scanned our tickets," Amara explained gently, holding up her phone screen with the glowing QR code. "We checked in online hours ago." The agent's lips twisted into a smirk that didn't reach her eyes. "That doesn't matter. Not everyone with a ticket belongs on this flight." The words carried venom. They weren't about protocol, and both girls felt it instantly. They weren't being stopped because of their boarding passes. They were being stopped because of something else, something ugly. Aaliyah's chest tightened as whispers rose around them. A man in a business suit craned his neck, looking irritated. A woman clutching a toddler pressed her lips together, pretending not to see. A group of teenagers giggled softly, covering their mouths as if watching a drama unfold for free. "Excuse me." Amara's voice shook, equal parts fear and anger. "We belong here just like anyone else. We paid for our tickets." The agent leaned forward, lowering her voice but not enough to hide the words from the nearest passengers. "Not today. You don't." A hush seemed to spread over the line, a silence full of complicity, full of unease. Nobody wanted to get involved, but everyone wanted to watch. Aaliyah felt humiliation creep up her spine like fire. The embarrassment wasn't just about being stopped, it was about the way the agent's eyes lingered on their skin, the way the words dripped with suggestion. The message was clear. "You don't belong here. You're not the kind of people we want in this space. Why are you doing this?" Aaliyah whispered, her throat dry. The agent straightened, her voice loud now, booming enough for the crowd. "Step aside. Do not hold up this line." The sudden command jolted the people behind them, and someone muttered angrily, "Come on, just move already." Another sighed, dramatically, pulling out their phone to check the time. The pressure was suffocating, as though the twins were the problem, not the victim of it. Aaliyah's vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. Not here. Not in front of these strangers who had already decided to look at her as trouble. Amara squeezed her hand tightly, her nails digging in. A silent promise. "We'll stand together. Please," Amara said, her voice softer now, pleading. "We just want to board. We're not doing anything wrong." The agent crossed her arms, her smirk returning. "You'll board when I say you can. Until then, step to the side." Every second dragged on like an eternity. The weight of judgmental eyes bore down on them. Some passengers shifted uncomfortably, aware of the wrongness but unwilling to speak. Others watched with quiet approval, as though confirming their own prejudices. But one voice finally cut through. An older woman with silver hair, standing 3 people back, spoke up. "This isn't right. They've got their tickets like the rest of us. Let them through." Heads turned toward her, some surprised, others annoyed at her interference. The agent's expression tightened into something even colder. "Ma'am, please stay out of this. This is between me and these passengers." But the truth was clear. It wasn't about tickets, or security, or rules. It was about power. The agent held it, and she was wielding it mercilessly. Amara's face flushed, red, her fists trembling at her sides. She wanted to shout, to demand fairness, but every time she opened her mouth the agent's glare silenced her. The unspoken threat was loud enough. "Push me further, and I'll make it worse." Aaliyah took a shaky breath. Her dignity screamed to fight back, but her fear whispered caution. The entire terminal seemed to shrink around them, a stage where they were unwilling actors in a cruel play, and the audience, silent, watching, choosing not to intervene. The girls felt small, isolated, and cornered, and though neither said it out loud, both knew what this was. This wasn't about boarding passes. This was about them, and in that moment of humiliation, Aaliyah couldn't help but wonder if no one was brave enough to speak up. Would anyone ever believe them? The air in the terminal grew heavier with every second. Aaliyah and Amara remained standing at the gate, singled out and stalled while others flowed past with ease. The boarding announcements echoed in the background, cheerful and routine, but, to the twins, they sounded like mockery. Each name called, each group invited forward was another reminder that they had been cast aside. Aaliyah clutched her phone tighter, as though gripping her proof of belonging, the electronic ticket glowing on her screen. She held it up, her voice straining for calm. "Here, look, this is my boarding pass and my sister has hers too. Everything's in order." The agent barely glanced. her lips curling with disdain. "I already told you. Not today." The words weren't just rejection, they were dismissal, cold, final, as if nothing they showed, nothing they explained, could ever matter. Aaliyah's stomach knotted. Around them, murmurs began to ripple. The line of passengers behind them shifted restlessly, some stretching to catch a better view of the confrontation. Amara's voice trembled as she tried again, softer this time. We just want to board, please." The plea hung in the air like smoke. The agent's smirk deepened, as though she enjoyed watching their composure unravel. Behind them, a man in a gray business suit leaned toward another passenger and muttered under his breath, though loud enough for the girls to hear. "Probably didn't pay for the right class." Trying to sneak on, the word struck Amara like a slap, and she turned her head away, blinking furiously. Another passenger, a woman holding a baby close to her chest, looked directly at the twins. Her eyes softened with sympathy, but she quickly glanced down at her child, choosing not to say a word. A group of college-aged kids in hoodies leaned against the wall nearby, whispering and giggling as though this was entertainment, not humiliation. The crowd became a mirror of society, as some indifferent, some silently supportive, some cruelly amused. And then there was one woman, an elderly lady with silver hair and a scarf wrapped neatly around her shoulders, stepped closer. Her voice was steady but quiet. "This isn't right," she said, her tone carrying both outrage and compassion. "They've shown their tickets. Let them through." For a brief second, hope flickered in Amara's chest. Aaliyah turned toward the woman, eyes wet but grateful, silently begging her to keep going, but the agent snapped her head up, her voice sharp with authority. "Ma'am, this doesn't concern you. Please stay in line." The older woman frowned but didn't push further. Her voice, though brave, was drowned in the heavy silence of dozens of others who refused to join her. One voice against a tide of silence was not enough to break through the wall of injustice. Amara felt her throat tighten as she swallowed back anger. She wanted to scream at everyone watching, "Why aren't you saying anything? Can't you see what's happening?" But the faces staring back told her everything. Some averted their eyes, ashamed. Others looked at her like a nuisance holding up their schedule. A few even smirked, as if satisfied to see her put in her place. The agent crossed her arms and raised her chin higher, feeding off the silence, emboldened by the lack of resistance. "Step aside, or I'll have security escort you out. You're disrupting the boarding process." Aaliyah's hands shook as she tried to steady her breathing. Disrupting the process. The irony was unbearable. They weren't disrupting anything, they were being stopped, humiliated, and blamed for it all. She turned to her sister, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why is no one helping us? Why do they all just stand there?" Amara's jaw tightened. Because to them, it's easier to pretend it's none of their business. The sting of truth cut deep. The twins weren't just fighting the agent, they were fighting an entire wall of indifference. And in that moment, surrounded by stares that judged, avoided, or simply observed, the loneliness pressed down harder than the injustice itself. Every second standing there became a test of endurance. The stares weren't just glances, they were verdicts. Silent, damning verdicts that whispered, "You don't belong, you're trouble, you're less." And yet, despite the heat of humiliation, despite the trembling of their voices, the twins refused to step back. They weren't going to let silence erase their right to be there. The agent's smirk sharpened into something meaner as she gestured to the nearby security guard. Her voice rang out, crisp and commanding, designed to humiliate more than to inform. "These two need to be escorted out. They're holding up the line." The word sliced through Aaliyah like a knife. Escorted out, as if they were criminals. She clutched her backpack straps tighter, her knuckles whitening, and turned toward the guard who now stepped forward. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in navy blue. His badge glinted under the fluorescent airport lights. He didn't look angry, just indifferent, as though this was another small task on a long list of duties. Amara's voice shook, but she forced herself to speak. "Escorted for what? We've done nothing wrong. We checked in, we passed security, we have tickets, we followed every rule." The guard stopped a few feet away from them, his arms folding loosely across his chest. He didn't question the agent. He didn't ask to see their tickets. He simply waited for the twins to obey. His silence told them everything. In his eyes, the agent's word was enough. The passengers behind them muttered and shifted again. One man groaned loudly. "Seriously, we don't have time for this drama." Another voice, younger, chimed in mockingly. "Maybe they're trying to sneak in for free." A ripple of laughter followed. The shame pressed heavier against Aaliyah's chest. It wasn't just the agent anymore, it was the echo chamber of strangers. Some amused, some indifferent, but none willing to stop the injustice unraveling before them. She wanted to scream at them all. "Look at us. Look at the tickets in our hands. Why can't you see we're telling the truth?" But the words stayed locked in her throat. The agent folded her arms smugly. "You've been asked nicely now. You're making this difficult." "Difficult?" Amara burst out, her voice quivering with both fury and fear. "You're humiliating us for no reason. How can we be difficult when all we did was show up and try to board the plane like everyone else?" The guard shifted slightly, his face unreadable. He didn't intervene, didn't defend them, didn't even question the cruelty of what was unfolding. He was just there, a wall. Aaliyah's breath came faster, shallow and shaky. She glanced at the crowd around them. Some eyes looked away the second she met them. Others lingered with open suspicion. A few looked guilty but said nothing. And then there were the ones smiling faintly at the scene, like spectators entertained by another person's downfall. That was the worst part of the silence. The suffocating, complicit silence of dozens of witnesses who chose not to step in. She whispered to her sister, her voice breaking, "Why won't anyone help us? Why is it just us?" Amara swallowed hard, her throat dry, because to them, this isn't injustice, it's just inconvenience. The truth of those words hollowed Aaliyah out. Every second dragged her deeper into humiliation. It wasn't just about being denied. It was about being reduced, stripped of dignity in public view, while an entire crowd silently decided their humanity wasn't worth the risk of defending. The agent leaned against the counter now, looking entirely at ease, as if she had already warned. "Security can escort you, or you can step aside quietly. Your choice." But it wasn't a choice. It was an ultimatum, one meant to break them down in front of everyone. Aaliyah forced herself to look up, her eyes glassy but fierce. "We belong here. We have every right to board this flight. You know that." Her voice trembled at the edges, but the words carried weight. The agent raised an eyebrow, unconcerned. "Not in my eyes." The cruelty of it slammed into them both. This wasn't about tickets. This wasn't about rules. This was about perception, the perception that their presence was somehow out of place. And in that moment, standing under the heavy stares of strangers, Aaliyah and Amara realized something chilling. This wasn't about one gate, one flight, one airline. It was about the endless ways silence allows injustice to thrive. Viewers, if you were standing there, if you saw two young girls being pushed aside, their dignity stripped for no reason, would you have stayed quiet or would you have spoken up? Comment below, because in moments like this, silence is not neutral, it is cruelty's partner. The bench they were told to sit on was hard, metallic, and cold against their skin, positioned deliberately away from the boarding gate. It wasn't a waiting seat. It was the kind of place people were directed to when they were a problem, when they were being contained, when they weren't welcome. Aaliyah and Amara sat side by side, bags at their feet, watching the line move smoothly now that they had been removed from it. The boarding process continued without pause. Cheerful announcements echoing overhead. Families bustled forward, dragging children in carry-ons. Business travelers strode with confidence, boarding passes already tucked in their pockets. One by one, passengers disappeared into the jet bridge, every beep of a scanned ticket sounding like a taunt. For the twins, each beep was another reminder of what had been stolen from them. Every sound whispered, "You don't belong here." "Not you." Aaliyah pressed her lips together tightly, her eyes fixed on the floor tiles. Her fingers trembled as she tapped against her thigh, a rhythm that betrayed her nerves. She didn't want to cry. Not here, not in front of the very people who had seen her humiliated. She had held back tears when the agent barked at her, when the guard loomed, when the crowd stared. But now, sitting on the bench, the dam inside her chest threatened to burst. Amara leaned forward, her elbows on her knees, her fists clenched so tightly her knuckles turned pale. Her voice was a whisper, almost swallowed by the noise of the terminal. "I can't believe this. I can't believe they just threw us aside like we're nothing." Aaliyah's throat ached. She managed to whisper back, "They decided before we even said a word. They looked at us and decided we didn't belong." She thought about the smirk on the agent's face, the way she didn't even bother to check their documents properly. She thought about the guard's empty expression, about the passengers who stared but never spoke. Her stomach twisted. Amara exhaled sharply, leaning back against the wall. "We can't let them treat us like this. We can't just sit here while they— What choice do we have?" Aaliyah cut in, her voice raw. "Do you think they'll listen if we fight harder? They've already decided. They've already painted us as trouble." The words hung heavy in the air. For a long moment neither of them spoke. Around them, the noise of the terminal swirled, laughter, rolling luggage wheels, the faint hiss of the intercom. All of it felt distant, like the world had moved on without them. Amara stared at her sister, her eyes glistening with frustration. "So we just accept it? Just let them strip us of our dignity? Is that who we are?" Aaliyah didn't answer. Her silence wasn't agreement, it was exhaustion. She felt drained, cornered, powerless. Fighting seemed pointless, but giving up felt unbearable. Their phones buzzed on the bench between them, the screens lighting up with notifications. Aaliyah glanced down, missed calls, more than one. Her chest tightened when she saw the name. "Dad." Amara picked up her phone, her thumb hovering over the screen. Her voice was soft, uncertain. "He called twice." Aaliyah swallowed hard. Their father, Robert Daniels, a man who had built an empire with his voice, his intellect, his presence. A man who commanded respect in boardrooms where people wore arrogance like armor. A man who always told them to stand tall, to know their worth, to never let anyone diminish them. But he wasn't here. He wasn't standing in front of the gate, watching his daughters be humiliated. He wasn't here to look into the agent's eyes and force accountability. He was just a name glowing on a phone screen. Amara's voice cracked. "Should we tell him?" Aaliyah hesitated. The thought of involving him filled her with both relief and dread. Relief because he would never let this slide. Dread because she knew what his fury looked like when injustice touched his family. She also knew what it meant to depend on his power instead of their own voices. She pressed her palms together tightly. I don't want him to think we can't handle ourselves. I don't want him to think we're weak. Amara's eyes burned. Weak, Aaliyah. They threw us out like garbage. They made us sit here like criminals. What are we supposed to do? Smile and pretend it didn't happen. Aaliyah closed her eyes, the sting of humiliation still fresh. She imagined their fathers, the reaction if he heard the full story. She imagined the rage in his voice, the fire in his eyes, and for the first time since this ordeal began, a flicker of power stirred in her chest. Still, fear lingered. Fear of escalation, fear of what might happen if the agents saw them making a call, fear of what the crowd would think hearing their father's name. Amara clenched her jaw, her hand gripping the phone tighter. I don't care what anyone thinks. I'm calling him. Aaliyah's eyes snapped open, wide with both alarm and hope. Amara, but her sister's thumb was already pressing the screen. The call began to ring, and the sound felt like a drumbeat of change. Each tone echoed louder than the hum of the airport. Each second stretched, loaded with tension. Aaliyah held her breath. Their father would answer, and when he did, the weight of silence surrounding them would finally shatter. Because if no one else in this terminal had the courage to stand with them, then their father's voice would become the force that made the world listen. The phone rang only twice before the call connected. Amara gripped it so tightly her knuckles ached. The voice on the other end was calm but laced with a kind of sharp concern that both girls recognized immediately. Amara, what's wrong? Why didn't you answer my calls earlier? Her throat tightened for a moment. The humiliation of the past half hour overwhelmed her, and all she could manage was a shaky dad. She swallowed hard, fighting the quiver in her voice. They won't let us board. They said we don't belong here. Silence fell on the line. A silence so absolute, it made her pulse quicken. Aaliyah leaned closer, straining to hear. Then, his voice came, steady, low, but carrying that unmistakable weight that always demanded attention. Put me on speaker. Amara's hand shook as she tapped the screen. The phone's tinny speaker crackled to life, and suddenly his presence filled the sterile air of the terminal. This is Robert Daniels. His voice was smooth yet edged with steel, the kind of tone that could silence an entire boardroom. I am told my daughters are being denied boarding. Is that correct? Every sound in the area seemed to fade. The guard froze mid-shift, his arms uncrossing slightly. The nearby passengers, previously whispering and laughing, now turned their full attention toward the phone. Even the agent, who moments earlier had been brimming with smug authority, visibly faltered. Her shoulders stiffened, her jaw tightened, but she forced out a reply. I wasn't aware. You weren't aware of what? Robert's voice cut her off sharply. That two young women with valid boarding passes were treated as though they were trespassers, that they were humiliated in front of a crowd, that your job is to provide service, not to decide who belongs. The agent's face paled. She opened her mouth but no words came out. A murmur rippled through the passengers who had been watching quietly. A few raised their phones, pretending to scroll but recording every second. Aaliyah and Amara exchanged a glance. For the first time that day, they felt a surge of power return to them, not because they had raised their voices, but because their father's was now booming through the very space where they had been silenced. The agent stammered. Sir, this is a misunderstanding. They were holding up the line, and I needed to. Robert Daniels didn't let her finish. His words sliced through her excuse like a blade. Holding up the line. You held them up, you singled them out, and you did it in public, in full view of passengers who now know exactly how your airline treats young black women. The crowd shifted, whispers growing louder. What had once been silent complicity was now curiosity, intrigue, and in some cases, shame. The woman with the baby who had looked away earlier now met the twins' eyes with a flicker of regret. The older woman with silver hair nodded subtly as if to say, finally, someone is speaking the truth. The guard, who had once been ready to escort them out without question, now stepped back slightly, his neutrality cracking under the weight of Robert's authority. He didn't say a word, but his posture changed from looming to cautious. The agent pressed, her lips together, her voice suddenly small. Mr. Daniels, I assure you, that was never my intention. We follow strict protocol. Protocol, Robert snapped. Do not insult my intelligence by hiding behind that word. Protocol does not explain humiliation. Protocol does not explain why my daughters, who did everything correctly, were treated like criminals while the rest of your passengers boarded freely. What you've done here is not protocol, it is prejudice. Gasps escaped from a few passengers, who had been straining to hear. Someone whispered, did he say Robert Daniels, the CEO? Another voice answered, of course he did. You can hear it. Amara's chest lifted as if she could finally breathe again. Aaliyah's hands still trembled, but now it wasn't just fear, it was adrenaline, a spark of vindication. The agent's face turned red. She fumbled with her words. I'll get the manager. We can clear this up right away. Good, Robert replied evenly. though his tone left no doubt of his anger simmering beneath. Because if you don't, the only thing you'll be clearing up is why your company will be making a very public apology tomorrow morning. And believe me, I will ensure the public hears every detail of this disgrace. The passengers around them, who had once pretended not to notice, now had phones raised openly. The silence of complicity was over. The tide had shifted. Amara glanced at her sister, whispering almost in disbelief, "Do you hear them? They're recording. They're finally paying attention." Aaliyah nodded, her eyes never leaving the agent, who now looked as though the ground beneath her had given way. The sound of their father's voice through the phone filled every corner of the gate. It was no longer just about two girls trying to board a plane. It was about accountability, about power used not to humiliate, but to protect. And as the agent fumbled with her radio to call the manager, every person within earshot knew the balance of power had shifted. The tension in the terminal thickened like smoke. Robert Daniels's voice still echoed from the speakerphone, crisp and unwavering. It had shifted the air itself moments ago. The twins were humiliated, small and cornered. Now it was the airline, an agent who looked like prey caught in the glare of a spotlight. Passengers leaned in from every direction. Some tried to pretend they weren't eavesdropping, but the tilt of their heads, the furtive glances, and the glowing cameras of their phones betrayed them. A young man in a leather jacket muttered under his breath, "This is wild," as he angled his camera higher. A mother hushed her child so she wouldn't miss a single word. Even the guard, once unmoved, shifted uneasily, no longer looming with authority but shrinking under it. Robert's voice came again, sharp enough to slice through the murmur of the crowd. "Do you understand the weight of what you've done here? You did not simply delay my daughters, you degraded them. You embarrassed them in front of strangers, and now those strangers are witnesses." The agent's throat bobbed as she swallowed. "Sir, I didn't know you didn't care to know," Robert interrupted. His words had the gravity of thunder before a storm. "That's worse." The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was charged. Everyone felt the truth of it. Aaliyah sat straighter, her eyes glistening as if her father's words poured strength back into her veins. Amara held her head higher, the sting of humiliation now transforming into a defiant pride. The agent's hands fumbled as she grabbed her radio, pressing the button too quickly, her voice trembling. "Manager to gate C12 now." Passengers whispered among themselves, "She's panicking. Did you hear what he said? Robert Daniels. That's the Robert Daniels. What is she thinking? Messing with his kids." The guard stepped forward cautiously, his expression finally cracking. He leaned toward the agent and muttered something low, but it was too late. The shift had already happened. The crowd no longer saw the twins as suspicious. They saw them as victims, and the agent as the villain. Robert's voice pierced through again. "You have one chance to correct this mistake. My daughters will board that plane, and they will be treated with the same dignity as every other passenger. If not, then by tomorrow, your airline will not only face MIT, will face the public. Do you understand me?" The agent's lips parted, but her words stuck in her throat. Her authority, once unshakable, had crumbled. She glanced nervously at the recording phones, at the growing number of passengers who were no longer silent but glaring at her. A man in a baseball cap spoke loudly from the line. "Let the girls on already. This is ridiculous." His voice was met with nods and murmurs of agreement. Another woman chimed in, "Yeah, they've done nothing wrong. We all saw it." The agent's cheeks flushed crimson. She looked trapped, cornered not by the twins but by the sudden chorus of accountability surrounding her. Robert's tone softened only slightly, but the steel remained. "You tried to strip my daughters of their dignity. Instead, you stripped yourself of yours." The line was delivered with such precision, it landed like a final verdict. The crowd reacted with a mix of gasps and approving nods. Some even whispered it back to each other as though repeating the words solidified the truth. Aaliyah felt her pulse race. For the first time since this ordeal began, she wasn't drowning under the weight of shame, she was watching her oppressor shrink. Amara squeezed her hand under the bench, her grip trembling but fierce. The guard took another step back, folding his arms tightly as if trying to fade into the background. The agent, now sweating, tried to gather composure, but her voice betrayed her. "Mr. Daniels, please, your daughters will be taken care of. I'll see to it personally." "See to it now," Robert demanded. "Yes, sir," she stammered, her voice breaking. Passengers watched in awe, some still recording, others whispering excitedly about the scene unfolding before them. It was no longer just was a spectacle, one that carried the weight of justice being wrestled back in real time, and through it all, the twins sat taller, their shame unraveling into something else, vindication. The storm that had begun as humiliation was now turning into reckoning. The sound of hurried footsteps echoed down the jet bridge as the gate manager appeared, suit jacket flapping and eyes darting nervously. He had clearly been pulled from somewhere important, his phone still clutched in his hand, tie loosened from the rush. The crowd seemed to part for him, their whispers turning into a low hum of anticipation. Everyone wanted to see what would happen next. The gate agent, red-faced and trembling, tried to straighten her shoulders, but it was useless. She looked like a cornered animal, scrambling to gather the authority that had already slipped through her fingers. "Mr. Daniels," she stammered into the phone. "Our manager is here now. He'll handle everything." Robert's voice came sharp as ever, resonating through the speakerphone. "Good. Let's see if anyone here still remembers what accountability means." The manager bent slightly, peering at the twins with a nervous glance, then at the gathering crowd with their phones raised like courtroom jurors holding gavel. His voice came smooth, practiced, but laced with unease. "Sir, I'm so sorry for the trouble. I'll ensure your daughters are treated with respect. This shouldn't have happened." But Robert didn't let him slide into corporate politeness. His words thundered back, commanding the air. "Apologies are hollow if the behavior remains unchanged. What happened here today was not a misunderstanding, it was deliberate. It was humiliating. My daughters were singled out, denied, and spoken to as though their existence was a problem. That is not an accident, that is a choice. And choices have consequences." The agent shifted on her feet, her breath quick and shallow. The crowd buzzed, tension rising again. Some passengers were openly filming, narrating under their breath. "This guy's tearing them apart. Man, she looks terrified." The manager's palms began to sweat. "Mr. Daniels, I can assure you, the situation is under control now." "Under control?" Robert snapped. "Do you think my daughter's humiliation is something you can smooth over with a smile and a corporate script? If this is how your airline treats young black women, then this is bigger than one gate agent. This is systemic. And I promise you, if my daughters don't walk onto that plane in the next 5 minutes, you won't be dealing with a single complaint. Be dealing with grounded flights, lawsuits, and headlines that will bury your reputation." The crowd gasped, murmurs rippling through the rows of passengers. A man near the back clapped softly, almost in awe, before quickly stopping when he realized the seriousness of the moment. Another woman whispered, "Grounded flights, who's this man?" The manager's face turned pale as he tugged at his tie. He tried to regain composure, but his voice cracked slightly. "Please, Mr. Daniels, there's no need for escalation. There's every need," Robert thundered. "Because escalation already happened the moment your staff decided my daughters were less deserving of dignity. You put them on trial, in front of strangers, and now strangers are your witnesses. Look around, your passengers are filming. This story will not die here." The agent finally cracked under the pressure. Her voice wavered, defensive and desperate. "I was just following procedure." Robert's tone turned icy. "Your procedure is discrimination wrapped in paperwork. Don't you dare hide behind it." The silence that followed was suffocating. The guard shifted his weight, no longer even pretending to support the agent. He looked down at the floor, unwilling to meet anyone's gaze. Passengers began speaking up, one after another. "Yeah, we saw it," called out the man in the baseball cap who had spoken earlier. "Those girls didn't do anything." A woman clutching a toddler added, "It was wrong. You don't treat kids like that." The swell of voices became a tide, and the agent looked like she might collapse under the weight of their judgment. Her authority was gone, replaced by shame. Robert's voice cut through, final and commanding. "This isn't a negotiation. My daughters will board now, and they will board with dignity. If not, your flights stop today. And tomorrow, the world will know your airline's name for all the wrong reasons." The manager swallowed hard, eyes darting between the twins, the furious father's voice on speaker, and the sea of watching passengers. He knew there was no way out but compliance. "Yes, sir." Immediately, the crowd stirred, relief and awe mingling. Aaliyah and Amara sat frozen, their hearts pounding, still caught between the sting of humiliation and the dawning realization that justice was finally bending in their direction. For the first time since the nightmare began, the balance of power had shifted completely. The girls were no longer victims in the shadows. They were the center of a reckoning, carried on their father's voice in the eyes of every witness around them, and everyone knew this was only the beginning. Aaliyah's hands trembled as she clutched her phone, still on speaker with their father's booming voice echoing through the terminal. The knot in her stomach refused to untangle even though the tide had finally turned. Amara sat rigid beside her, jaw tight, staring at the agent who had been so quick to strip them of dignity. Neither sister could quite believe what they were witnessing. The same woman who moments ago wielded authority like a weapon now stood exposed, trembling under the harsh fluorescent lights and the judgment of dozens of eyes. The manager turned to the twins with a shaky smile, the kind that tried to mask desperation. "Ladies, we sincerely apologize for this misunderstanding. Please, let's get you both on that flight." His voice cracked slightly at the word misunderstanding, as if even he knew how false it rang. Robert's voice on the phone cut through again like a blade. "Don't you dare call it that. My daughters don't need your rehearsed excuses. They need respect. They need to know they won't face this humiliation again. Do you understand the difference?" The twins' eyes glistened as the passengers around them murmured in agreement. Some nodded. A woman leaned forward from her seat in the waiting area, her voice clear and firm. "That's right. Respect, not excuses." For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Aaliyah's chest loosened. She inhaled deeply, air filling her lungs like a lifeline. She looked at Amara, who had tears brimming at the edges of her eyes. Her sister whispered, almost too softly to hear, "We're not alone. They see us now. The agent's cheeks burned crimson. She opened her mouth to speak, but every word died in her throat under the weight of stares, cameras, and the voice of Robert Daniels still reverberating from the phone. It was no longer just her and the twins. She was surrounded by a tribunal of strangers holding her accountable. The manager shifted uncomfortably, then turned to the guard, who had long since withdrawn his allegiance. He looked like a child caught misbehaving, eyes glued to the floor, as if wishing he could disappear. No backup would come for the agent now. Robert's voice softened slightly, though it still carried authority. Aaliyah, Amara, lift your heads. You've done nothing wrong. The shame belongs to them, not to you. Walk with pride, not fear. Do you hear me? The girl's chins lifted almost in unison, as though his words had physically pulled them upward. Tears slid down Amara's cheeks, but her spine straightened. Aaliyah blinked furiously to keep her own tears from falling, her resolve hardening. Passengers began to speak again, this time not in whispers but in clear, steady voices. They deserve better. We stand with them. This is wrong, and it needs to change. The ripple of support swelled, echoing off the sterile walls of the terminal. For once the bystanders were no longer silent. They had chosen a side. The manager gestured toward the gate, desperate to resolve the nightmare before it escalated further. Please, come with me. We'll escort you onto the plane. His tone carried the urgency of a man trying to contain a fire, already out of control. But Robert's command from the phone froze him in his tracks. No, not until they hear it. Every single person in this terminal needs to hear the truth from you, that they were wrongfully denied, that it wasn't procedure, that it was bias. Speak it aloud, and maybe you'll begin to scrape the surface of accountability. The agent's lips quivered, her hands shaking so violently that the papers she held slipped and scattered across the floor. Every eye in the terminal locked onto her, waiting. The silence pressed against her like a wall. Her throat bobbed as she swallowed hard, then whispered, "They were wrongfully denied." Louder, Robert demanded. Her eyes darted wildly, as if looking for an escape, but there was none. She took a shallow breath and forced the words out. Louder this time. They were wrongfully denied boarding. It was not procedure. It was. Her voice cracked. It was my fault. Gasps swept through the crowd, followed by a murmur that quickly grew into affirmations. There it is. Finally, she admits it. Someone clapped once, sharply, as if punctuating the confession. Aaliyah's chest ached, not from pain, but from the overwhelming release of tension. For the first time, she felt the weight shift entirely off her shoulders. Amara exhaled a shaky laugh through her tears, disbelief mingling with relief. They had been dragged through humiliation, but they had emerged with the truth laid bare, for all to see. Passengers began recording more intensely now, narrating their astonishment. She admitted it on camera. That's huge. These girls stood their ground. Robert's voice dropped lower, steady and resolute. Good now, let them board. And remember, this moment is carved into memory, not erased by your apology. The world will hear of it. The manager nodded vigorously, motioning toward the gate agents inside. Right away, sir. His composure was gone, his authority stripped, but his obedience was immediate as the twins stood, their legs wobbly but their heads held high. Applause erupted, not from everyone but from enough people to make the terminal vibrate with energy. Strangers clapped, some cheered softly, others simply nodded in solidarity. For two young women, who had moments ago been treated as invisible, the affirmation was overwhelming. Amara squeezed her sister's hand, whispering through trembling lips, "We did it. We actually did it." Aaliyah gave the smallest, fiercest smile she could manage, her voice shaking but steady. "No, Amara, we didn't do it alone. Dad and all of them," she said, gesturing to the crowd. "They stood with us." And as the sisters prepared to walk through the gate at last, every step forward felt like reclamation of dignity, of power, of worth. The humiliation that had once threatened to break them now burned into something stronger, a fire that could not be extinguished. That the journey was not over. The confrontation was not finished. But for the first time since the nightmare began, they weren't just passengers, they were victors. The boarding call echoed through the terminal, but this time the sound didn't sting with exclusion. For the first time in what felt like hours, Aaliyah and Amara were actually being invited to step forward. The tension hadn't completely left. The air it clung to them, thick and electric, but it was different now. The humiliation that once weighed them down had turned into something else, a sense of vindication, a fragile but undeniable triumph. The manager motioned politely, almost deferentially. "Please, this way." His voice carried none of the arrogance from earlier, only the eagerness of a man desperate to end the storm. But even as he gestured, the twins hesitated. Their feet refused to move immediately, as though the act of stepping forward symbolized far more than just walking onto a plane. It meant reclaiming space they had been told they didn't deserve, taking back dignity that had been stripped from them. Aaliyah inhaled deeply and looked at her sister. "Ready?" she whispered. Amara nodded, though her lips trembled. They laced their fingers together, hands tight, as if drawing courage from each other. The crowd shifted around them. Phones were still raised, capturing every second. Some passengers offered encouraging nods and warm smiles. Others simply watched in silence. A few still looked away, uncomfortable, unwilling to engage, but their discomfort didn't matter anymore. What mattered were the voices that had risen, the ones that refused to stay quiet when injustice unfolded in front of them. As the girls approached the gate, the agent who had denied them earlier stepped aside quickly, her face pale, her eyes downcast. She avoided their gaze entirely, as if terrified of what she might see reflected there. Amara's chest tightened. Part of her wanted to shout at the woman, to demand she look them in the eyes, but she kept walking, chin lifted, refusing to let anger rob her of the strength she had finally reclaimed. When they handed over their boarding passes, the scanner beeped, and the agent inside forced a small, rehearsed smile. "Thank you for boarding." Her voice was mechanical, drained of sincerity, but the sound of that beep, the same one they had been denied before, rang like a victory bell. For the first time they were not excluded, not cast aside. The jet bridge stretched out before them, dimly lit, sterile, and humming with the faint vibration of the aircraft waiting at the end. Each step echoed, and in the silence between them, the girls could hear the murmurs of passengers behind them. "I'll never forget this. Good for them. I hope this airline learned something." The words trailed after them like a chorus of validation. But as they walked, the weight of the ordeal pressed down. Their father's voice still lingered in their minds, firm, protective, commanding justice from hundreds of miles away. They wanted desperately to speak to him again, to feel that shield around them. Amara whispered, "We'll call him once we sit down." Aaliyah nodded, squeezing her sister's hand tighter. When they stepped onto the plane, dozens of eyes turned toward them. The atmosphere inside was starkly different from the terminal. The narrow aisle felt like a stage, every row of passengers and audience silently assessing them. Some eyes were curious, others sympathetic, and a few narrowed with judgment or irritation, as though the twins were an inconvenience delaying the flight. Aaliyah felt heat rising in her chest. She remembered vividly how they had been spoken to outside, how easily their existence had been dismissed. Would the passengers here know? Would they care? Or would they too look at her and her sister as less than? A woman in the third row caught Aaliyah's gaze. She smiled warmly, her eyes kind. Then she gave the smallest, quietest nod, as if to say, "I saw what happened. I'm with you." That one gesture pierced through the suffocating tension and steadied Aaliyah's trembling heart. The flight attendant waiting near the front of the cabin forced a too bright grin. "Welcome aboard," she said quickly, her tone betraying unease. She knew. They all knew. News traveled faster than the boarding process itself. The entire crew had likely heard whispers of the chaos outside. Amara's lips pressed together in a thin line. She felt every stare burning against her skin. When one man in the aisle seat muttered under his breath, "Holding up the flight for this," she stopped short, her body frozen. Aaliyah tightened her grip and leaned closer. "Ignore him," she whispered. "We're walking through this no matter what." They continued down the aisle, finally finding their seats halfway. Down, sliding into them felt both like collapse and like reclamation. They sank into the fabric, shoulders heavy but unbroken. The hum of the plane surrounded them, a strange comfort after the chaos. As passengers continued to board behind them, some avoided eye contact, others glanced with curiosity, and a few offered quiet smiles. One teenage girl, earbuds dangling, whispered as she passed, "You guys are so brave." Amara's eyes widened at the unexpected support, and a small, shaky smile touched her lips. When the last of the passengers settled, the intercom crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be departing shortly. Thank you for your patience." The captain's voice was calm, but there was something weighted in his tone, as if he too was aware of the storm that had preceded takeoff. Amara leaned against the window, her reflection staring back at her. "Do you think this changes anything?" she asked quietly. Aaliyah turned to her, her voice steady despite the exhaustion. "Maybe not the world, but it changes something in us, and that's enough for now." They both sat in silence as the plane prepared to taxi. The ordeal wasn't over, not by a long shot. There would be fallout. Their father would ensure it. The videos captured would spread. Conversations would ignite. But in that moment, as the engines roared to life and the plane rolled forward, Aaliyah and Amara finally felt something they hadn't since the nightmare began. They felt like passengers, rightful, undeniable passengers, just like everyone else on board. And for the first time all day, that was enough. The engines roared louder as the plane lifted off the ground, but neither Aaliyah nor Amara felt the usual thrill of takeoff. Their bodies sat strapped into their seats, yet their minds were still back in the terminal, trapped in the echoes of the humiliation, the raised voices, the dismissive stares. The cabin around them buzzed with the quiet shuffle of passengers adjusting, settling in, already moving on. But the twins couldn't move on. Not yet. Amara gripped the armrest so tightly her knuckles turned pale. "I still feel like they're looking at us," she whispered, her voice almost trembling. Aaliyah reached over, covering her sister's hand. "Let them look. We're here. We made it. They didn't stop us." But Amara shook her head. "It's not just about getting on this plane. It's about how easily they thought they could erase us, like we didn't matter." The thought cut through both of them like a blade. The silence between them was filled with unspoken truths that this wasn't the first time they had been treated differently, and deep down, they feared it wouldn't be the last. But this time was different. This time, they had a shield, a voice far more powerful than the gate agent, the manager, or even the faceless airline rules. Their father, Aaliyah, pulled out her phone and leaned close, whispering, "We should call him. He needs to know we're safe, that we're finally in the air." Amara nodded, her eyes moist. The plane had just leveled off when Aaliyah pressed the phone to her ear. The ringing filled her chest with anticipation. Then, his deep, commanding voice cut through the static. "Girls, are you all right?" For the first time since the ordeal began, their composure cracked. Both of them spoke at once, voices overlapping, breaking. "We're on the plane now. They finally let us through." There was a pause, a silence heavy with both relief and restrained fury. "Good. But I want you to understand something." Their father's voice rumbled, sharp with controlled anger. "This isn't over. Not by a long shot." They could hear movement on his end papers shuffling, the clicking of a keyboard, the clipped tone of a man already pulling levers of power. "They thought they could humiliate you. They thought they could treat you like you didn't belong. Well, tonight, that airline will learn exactly whose children they tried to deny." Amara wiped her cheeks, whispering, "Dad, please don't get in trouble for us." There was a short laugh, humorless and cold. "Trouble? No, I don't get in trouble. I make trouble for people who cross my family." The twins looked at each other, breathless. They knew their father was powerful, but they had never heard him sound quite like this. Steel in every syllable, fury wrapped in calm. Down the aisle, a few passengers who had overheard bits of their earlier conversation were now stealing glances. The man across from them pretended to adjust his headphones, but his eyes lingered, curious. A mother with her young daughter leaned slightly closer, her gaze soft, as though silently offering strength. Their father's voice pulled them back in. "Listen carefully. By the time you land, I will have already spoken with the board of directors. Every executive in that company will know exactly what happened to you. Every camera in that terminal captured proof, and every bystander has footage. Their attempt to silence you is about to become their downfall." Aaliyah's throat tightened. "But what if they twist it? What if people don't believe us?" "Then they'll believe me," he said simply. The weight of certainty in his tone was like a shield wrapping around them. "No one ignores the CEO when he's holding the evidence. They'll issue a public apology. Heads will roll. And you," his voice softened now, tender but firm, "you will walk through this world knowing you stood tall, that you didn't let them break you. That matters more than anything." Tears pricked Amara's eyes again, but this time they weren't born of humiliation. They were born of something deeper: relief, protection, power. The call ended with his final words. "Stay strong. I'll see you soon. And remember, the world only changes when someone refuses to be silent. Tonight, that someone is you." The girls sat quietly, his voice still echoing in their minds as the cabin lights dimmed. The hum of the engines felt steadier now, almost soothing. Around them, whispers began to spread again, passengers murmuring about what they had seen. Some shook their heads, appalled. Others muttered curses at the airline under their breath, and a few simply stared with a new kind of respect. Aaliyah looked out the window at the endless night sky. "We weren't just passengers today," she whispered. "We were a test, and they failed." Amara turned to her, eyes steady now. "But we didn't." The plane soared forward, carrying them not just toward their destination, but toward a ripple effect they couldn't yet imagine. By the time they landed, the world outside would already be different. The videos would have spread. The story would be told. The name of the airline would trend not for its service, but for its shame. And somewhere, in boardrooms filled with suits and nervous whispers, their father's voice would thunder like a hammer, demanding accountability, demanding justice. The twins leaned against each other, exhaustion finally overtaking them. But even as they drifted toward sleep, one truth rang louder than the engines, louder than the murmurs, louder than the fear. They had been denied, dismissed, and humiliated, but they had walked through fire and boarded anyway. And no one, not a gate agent, not a manager, not an entire airline, would ever be able to erase their dignity again. So to anyone watching, anyone listening, anyone who has ever felt silenced or unseen, what would you have done if you were there? Would you have spoken up? Would you have stood silent? Comment below, because your voice matters in stories like these. And if you believe no one should ever face humiliation because of who they are, hit like, share this story, and subscribe, because silence only protects injustice, but voices like yours help tear it down. The story of Aaliyah and Amara doesn't end here. It's only the beginning.